She wanted me out of the company, so she started poisoning my coffee. My own wife. That's the kind of sentence you never expect to say about the person you vowed to build a life with. But there I was, sitting at a polished brunch table with Emily, my wife of 8 years, and her sister, Victoria, staring down at a smoothie that smelled like betrayal. For 6 months, I had been falling apart. The fatigue, the dizziness, the nausea that came out of nowhere, it all began to make sense once I realized the pattern. Every crash, every mysterious illness always followed a meal or drink prepared by Emily. As the Chief Technology Officer at Marlowe Technologies, I had worked my way up with sheer persistence. But suddenly, I was missing meetings, forgetting key details, showing up looking like I hadn't slept in weeks. It wasn't a coincidence. Emily knew exactly what she was doing. And today, I was going to expose it. She smiled sweetly, placing the smoothie in front of me with that carefully polished tone. "You've been so stressed, Nathan. I made you something special." I picked up the glass, swirling it slowly, pretending to take a sip. The smell was off. Metallic. A sharp, chemical edge that no fruit blend should ever have. I glanced across the table. Victoria was tapping on her phone, detached and disinterested, or so she wanted me to think. But today, I had a plan. With a casual flick of my wrist, I faked a clumsy nudge, knocking the table just enough to swap my glass with Victoria's. It was subtle, rehearsed. Emily's eyes darted to the cup immediately. Not to me, to the cup. That tiny flinch told me everything. For months, I had played the fool, but not today. Today, I was in control. I sat back, sipped water, and waited. Within minutes, Victoria's complexion shifted. She rubbed her temples, murmuring about feeling lightheaded. Her fingers trembled. I had lived that exact scene too many times, doubled over in my office, no one understanding why. But this time, Emily's little game was unraveling right in front of her. She was watching the wrong person suffer, and I was watching her panic. I stood up slowly, pretending to adjust my jacket as the brunch chatter buzzed around us. "Excuse me for a second," I said lightly, stepping back just enough to execute the move I had been rehearsing in my head for weeks. With a subtle pivot, I reached over and swapped my glass with Victoria's, a smooth, practiced motion hidden behind the rustle of a napkin. Emily didn't notice, at least not immediately. She was busy playing hostess, the perfect doting wife in front of our guests. But when her eyes drifted back to the table, she caught it. Her gaze locked onto my original glass, now sitting in front of Victoria. Her smile tightened. The tiniest flicker of panic danced in her eyes. I sat down, folded my hands, and waited. Victoria was still scrolling through her phone, oblivious, but I knew how this would play out. I had lived it too many times. The metallic scent from the drink was faint but unmistakable, and in 15 minutes, the poison's early effects would start to kick in. My pulse thrummed in my ears, not from fear, but from the cold anticipation of what was about to unfold. Emily's facade was flawless. She leaned toward Victoria with feigned warmth. "Vicky, you should really drink that smoothie before it gets warm. I added your favorite, blueberries." I watched her lips curl into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Every word was a dagger wrapped in silk. Victoria, trusting, took a sip. I nearly pitied her. Nearly. Minutes crawled by. At first, it was subtle. Victoria rubbed her temple absent-mindedly. Her fingers lingered there longer than usual. Her brow furrowed as she blinked away a creeping haze. Emily kept glancing at me, waiting for signs of my usual collapse, but none came. Instead, Victoria's complexion paled. Her posture shifted, no longer casual and upright, but slouched, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the cup down. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. "Everything all right, Vicky?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She laughed it off, but there was a thin edge to her voice. I feel a little off. Maybe the room's too warm?" Emily's hand shot out to adjust the thermostat. "It's probably just the heat," she chimed, her voice too quick, too rehearsed, but the white knuckles gripping the table betrayed her. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so only Emily could hear. "Funny. That's exactly how I felt the last 5 times you made me coffee." Her smile froze. The color drained from her face. She knew, and she knew that I knew. Victoria pressed her fingers to her lips. My stomach feels like it's flipping." Her words were slurred, her body now visibly trembling. Emily reached for her glass, perhaps to swap it back, but I intercepted it, sliding it casually across the table toward myself. "I think we should call someone," I said calmly, placing my phone on the table. The screen lit up, voice recorder active. Emily's eyes darted to the screen. "Nathan, you're being dramatic." "Am I?" I cut her off, my voice sharp now. "Vicky's exhibiting the same symptoms I've been hospitalized for. Isn't that a wild coincidence?" Victoria looked between us, her confusion turning into dawning horror. "Wait, what are you talking about?" Emily's fingers curled into fists. "Nathan, you're humiliating yourself. Stop!" But it was too late. The mask had slipped. "Victoria," I said, turning to her gently, "think back. How many times have you felt nauseous or dizzy after brunches here, or after drinks Emily prepared?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. I continued, "Because I've got 6 months of hospital records that match the timeline of these brunches perfectly. And today we have proof, because that cup wasn't meant for you." Emily stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "You're insane!" "No," I said coldly. "I've just been patient." Victoria's breathing quickened, her hand clutching the edge of the table for support. I pulled out my phone and calmly dialed emergency services. Emily's composure was crumbling now, her eyes flickering between Victoria's pale face and my steady expression. "This was your mistake, Emily," I said, voice low. "You got sloppy. You assumed I'd keep drinking, keep collapsing, keep playing the fool. But not today." The line connected. 911, what's your emergency? "Yes, I need an ambulance at 145 Glenview Terrace. My sister-in-law is having a severe reaction to something she ingested, and I'm going to need the police as well." Emily's breath hitched. She had lost control. The moment Victoria was wheeled out by the paramedics, still conscious but visibly shaken, I stood rooted to the spot, my hand tightening around my phone. The recording was still active, but it was time for the next phase. Emily thought she had orchestrated the perfect downfall for me, slow, subtle, undetectable, but the irony was delicious. Her need for control made her predictable. As the front door clicked shut behind the medics, I slowly turned my phone toward the 2 officers who had just arrived, flashing my screen where the audio file was paused and ready. "I think you'll want to hear this," I said, hitting play. Emily's voice filled the room, her tone dripping with smug confidence. "Nathan's been off his game lately. The firm needs someone more stable to lead product development. Maybe it's time they consider a fresh face, one who doesn't spend half his time
recovering from mysterious illnesses. The officers exchanged glances. One of them pulled out a notepad while the other's hand hovered near his radio. Emily's reaction was swift. "You're twisting my words, Nathan. That's completely out of context." I interrupted, stepping forward. "Is it? Because that wasn't recorded in secret. That was you in our kitchen, bragging about how the firm was ready to move on without me. You just didn't expect me to start recording the moment you set that coffee down." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but the cracks in her composure were beginning to widen. One of the officers, Detective Alvarez, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I think it would be best if you remained calm. Given these circumstances, we'll need to conduct a search of the premises. Would you consent to that, or do we need to obtain a warrant?" Emily's eyes darted toward the staircase. For a fraction of a second, her mask slipped, revealing a flash of panic. That was all I needed. "I think you'll find everything you need in her vanity drawer upstairs. There's a hidden compartment beneath the false bottom. That's where she keeps the pharmaceuticals." Emily's sharp intake of breath was as good as a confession. The officers moved swiftly. Emily didn't try to stop them. She knew she couldn't. I watched her silently as she folded her arms, her nails digging into her skin, her mind likely racing through 1,000 contingency plans. But this wasn't a chess match anymore. She had already made the fatal move. Minutes later, Detective Alvarez returned, holding a clear evidence bag. Inside was a small, sleek case, too elegant to be medical. He opened it, revealing neatly labeled vials and blister backs of prescription drugs. But these weren't treatments. They were weapons, drugs designed to mimic early-onset neurological disorders, vertigo-inducing compounds, substances known for causing muscle weakness, and others with long-term cognitive side effects. But that wasn't the worst part. Tucked inside the same drawer was a planner. Alvarez handed it to me, and as I flipped through the pages, my stomach turned. It wasn't a schedule. It was a blueprint for my destruction. Every major client meeting, every critical presentation was marked. Beside them, annotations: increased dosage, mild symptoms, risk of hospitalization acceptable. She had charted out my decline in meticulous detail. My own wife had been orchestrating my professional ruin like a corporate takeover. But she miscalculated one thing. I spent my career analyzing patterns, debugging complex systems. Emily's mistake was assuming I wouldn't apply those same skills to her. As Alvarez bagged the evidence, Emily's bravado finally cracked. "Nathan, think about what you're doing. If this goes public, it'll destroy both of us. Do you really want that?" I stared at her, my expression blank. "You already destroyed everything, Emily. I'm just making sure you don't get to rewrite the story." She opened her mouth to retort, but the officer stepped between us. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us now." As they led her away, I felt an unfamiliar calm settling in my chest. For the first time in months, I wasn't bracing for the next ambush. The game was over, and I had won. Not through rage, not through confrontation, but by letting her own arrogance expose her. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about winning. It was about reclaiming my life.
The courtroom was suffocating. Every seat was filled. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras poised to capture every micro-expression. Colleagues from the firm sat rigid in the gallery, murmuring in tight whispers, as if their voices could somehow shield them from the unraveling spectacle. And there she sat, Emily, draped in a tailored gray suit that couldn't hide the pallor in her face or the frantic, darting eyes of a cornered predator. She had always thrived in environments where control was hers to wield, but not here, not today. Her defense had tried to spin a narrative of a devoted wife, crumbling under the pressures of a high-stakes career and a demanding marriage. Jessica Bennett, the attorney began, using her full name like a weapon of sympathy, is a woman who lost herself in the shadows of corporate expectations and marital strain. The words were crafted carefully, delivered with an air of compassion, as if Emily was merely a victim of her own overachieving nature. But facts don't bend. The prosecution had been methodical, much like Emily's own schemes. First, they introduced the damning chain of emails between Emily and her sister Victoria. The subject line alone was enough to silence the defense. Contingency plan, Nathan's replacement strategy. The emails detailed every step, how Emily would subtly erode my standing within the firm, planting doubts about my health, my reliability. How Victoria would assist in crafting narratives that positioned Emily as the more stable, dependable candidate. The courtroom grew tense as witnesses took the stand. Colleagues who had once exchanged polite small talk with Emily at corporate events now exposed her quiet campaign of sabotage. Karen from HR recalled how Emily had privately expressed concerns over my workload tolerance. Jonathan from the client relations team admitted that he had been warned by Emily to anticipate my frequent absences due to health issues. Piece by piece, the prosecution unveiled a meticulously orchestrated downfall, one that Emily had engineered in the guise of wifely concern. But it wasn't until the toxicology report was presented that the courtroom's atmosphere shifted from tense to electric. Dr. Linton, a clinical toxicologist, took the stand holding a thick binder. His testimony was a scalpel, cutting through every defense narrative Emily's team had crafted. The compounds found in Mrs. Victoria Langley's system, he said, adjusting his glasses, are consistent with a class of substances known to induce chronic fatigue, cognitive fog, and gastrointestinal distress. Traces of these compounds were discovered in samples taken from health shakes prepared by the defendant. The term health shakes hung in the air like a noose. Emily's attorney attempted to object, but the prosecution was relentless. We have obtained receipts for the bulk purchase of these substances. The orders were placed using accounts linked directly to Jessica Bennett's home office. Screens displayed the incriminating paper trail, transactions, shipment confirmations, even a delivery signature. Emily's. The defense tried one last desperate pivot. They introduced a psychological evaluation suggesting that Emily's actions were not malicious, but the result of an untreated anxiety disorder. It was a thin argument, and the jury knew it. Malice wrapped in a clinical diagnosis is still malice. Then came the verdict. As the judge's gavel struck, a ripple of silence washed over the courtroom. On the charges of attempted poisoning, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm, the defendant, we find, guilty on all counts. Emily's composure cracked. The woman who once controlled every room she walked into was reduced to a trembling shell. Her lips quivered, eyes darting as if still searching for a loophole, an escape hatch that didn't exist. Mrs. Bennett, given the premeditated nature of your actions, the court hereby sentences you to 20 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for the first 15. For a moment, it looked as if the weight of the sentence physically crushed her. Her shoulders sagged. The air that once filled her self-importance now hissed out in a slow, involuntary breath. She turned her head slightly, her gaze briefly meeting mine across the room. There was no apology in her eyes, just disbelief. Disbelief that she had lost. As the bailiffs cuffed her hands and led her away, I remained seated. I didn't need to stand in triumph. I didn't need to shout. The truth had done what months of suffering could not. It had unmasked her, stripped away the curated image, and laid bare the rot beneath. Emily had tried to dismantle my life piece by piece. But today, in this room, her own carefully constructed world had crumbled, and I had survived every strike. The spotlight felt different this time. It wasn't harsh or interrogative like it had been in that courtroom. No, this was a softer glow, one that didn't demand but acknowledged. Months had passed since Emily was let out in handcuffs, yet the aftershocks of her betrayal still rippled beneath the surface. But here I stood, at the Marlowe Technologies Global Leadership Summit, not as a victim, not as a cautionary tale, but a man who had rebuilt himself from the ruins of someone else's ambition. Integrity, I began, my voice firm yet measured, is not about being flawless. It's about staying grounded when the people you trust most try to rip that ground out from under you. The room was silent. Hundreds of executives, partners, and industry leaders sat frozen, their attention anchored to every word. They didn't know the full story, at least not the gritty, sleepless night details, but they knew enough. They knew the headlines. They knew Emily's name, and they knew mine. When betrayal comes from a stranger, it's easy to dismiss. But when it comes from across the dinner table, from a hand that once held yours, that's when it tests your core. I let the words hang in the air for a breath longer. I stand here today, not because I dodged the storm, but because I walked through it and chose not to let it define me. The applause began slow, polite, until it wasn't. It swelled into something louder, something real. They weren't just clapping for a speech. They were clapping for a man who had every reason to give up, yet stood taller than before. After the session, the company's CEO, Michael Grayson, approached me with a handshake that carried more weight than any contract. "Nathan, I've seen a lot of people fold under less," he said, his tone layered with admiration. "But you didn't just endure, you elevated. And that's the kind of leadership we need steering this ship." That was the moment. The culmination of months of humiliation, legal battles, and sleepless nights. I was promoted to Chief Operating Officer of Marlowe Technologies, the very position Emily had clawed, schemed, and poisoned to take for herself. The irony wasn't lost on me. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about recognition. Not from others, but from within. I had doubted myself in the dark corners of my apartment when the world seemed indifferent to my pain. I had wondered if I was weak for not seeing Emily's betrayal sooner. But standing here, offered this role on merit, on integrity, I realized the only thing that had ever been lacking was the acknowledgement of my own worth. In the following months, as I settled into the new role, I noticed a shift, not just in title, but in the way people looked at me. Not with pity, but with respect. The same colleagues who once exchanged cautious glances now sought my counsel. They weren't seeing Nathan, the man who had been betrayed. They saw Nathan, the leader who had survived and thrived. Even in the quiet moments, like late evenings when the office emptied out and I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, I found a sense of peace. I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore. I wasn't bracing for the next betrayal. Emily had tried to poison my body, my reputation, and my future. But in doing so, she had inadvertently purified my path. She stripped away illusions, forcing me to confront who I was when the scaffolding of comfort collapsed. And I liked the man who emerged from that wreckage, scarred but unbowed.
In the end, Emily didn't destroy me. She liberated me. There was a time when her betrayal consumed every thought, where every success felt shadowed by the memory of what she tried to take from me. But standing here now, I realize something simple, yet profound. Betrayal doesn't define you. How you rise from it does. Every poisoned cup, every manipulative smile, every whispered lie, they were lessons. Harsh, brutal lessons that forced me to see the difference between recognition given by others and recognition earned within. Emily tried to sabotage my career, my health, and my peace of mind. Yet all she succeeded in doing was stripping away the illusions I once lived under. The man who stands at the helm of Marlowe Technologies today isn't just the survivor of Emily's schemes. He's the product of relentless persistence, of choosing to rebuild when it was easier to collapse, of walking into every room with scars that no longer sting, but remind me of battles won. People often ask if I regret not pressing for a harsher sentence, or if I ever think about giving Emily a chance to explain. The truth is, vengeance is loud, but peace is enduring. I don't need apologies. I don't need revenge. I have a life now that is beyond her reach, a life crafted from resilience, integrity, and quiet victories that no one can take from me. Every morning, when I sip my coffee, brewed by my own hands in a space filled with trust, it tastes better. Not because it's from an expensive machine or a fancy cafe, but because it's untainted, pure, just like the life I fought to reclaim. To anyone out there battling betrayal, know this: the pain will pass, but the strength you build in its place will stay with you forever. You don't need to shout your victory to the world, just live it. If this story resonates with you, if you faced betrayal and chose to rise instead of crumble, share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's build a space where quiet strength is celebrated. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. More stories of resilience and redemption are coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss them.